you want me to take the roll?
Well, whatever we do for work sessions, we didn't used to, but now it's important, so sure.
Just note who's here,
We
that's
should
fine.
know who's here.
Okay. Mr. Chair, Joseph Clark.
I'm here. The only one missing from the board is Mike,
And Michael Baldani.
and you can make a note that Pawan has resigned, effective today. Okay. So, let's begin with what the village board has asked us to do, and then we can ask Stuart to help us clarify this. So, don't worry about the 62 days, although I'd like it not to take that long. But we are asked to do 4 things. Decide whether this, 5 things. First is, do we believe this is a text amendment? And why do we believe it's a text amendment? And if we don't believe it's a text amendment, why don't we believe it's a text amendment? Then, the four guiding principles below are whether such change is consistent with the aims and principles embodied in the law as to the particular district's cover. Which areas, land uses, buildings, and establishments of the village will be directly affected by such change, and what way will they be affected? Indirect implications, such change in its effect on other regulations, and whether the proposed amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan of the village and the LWRP, which is the waterfront revitalization plan. So, which is many years old.
2011.
Yeah. So given that, so Stuart, can you talk to us about what a text amendment, frame what a text amendment would be?
Sure. I think the best example is what this board recently considered involving the Cardinal McCluskey residence on North Island. Effectively, what the text amendment is, it is a change to the language of the zoning code with regard to a particular location or within particular zones. McCluskey is, as I said, is a prime example of that. The requested change there was to add the word residential for schools that are permitted to be located within T-zones. After discussions back and forth, this board made its recommendations, which were in fact adopted by the Board of Trustees, and it was ultimately adopted as Local Law 1 of this year. But the text amendment, from the way I view it and the way I've seen it interpreted, is it's a correction to the text, but it's not a major overhaul of a zone. It is, if you wanted to put, if you had a particular, another example, if you had a particular type of business that you wanted to operate in a zone that is otherwise not covered within your text, but someone comes in and says, well, I'm similar to be at a spa, or I'm similar to be at a bar, or something along those lines. And I wanted you to include that as one of the permitted uses within your particular zone. That would effectively be the text amendment that you're talking about. And obviously, if you note that in section 270-59, which deals with the procedure for amending, there is actually different considerations for text amendments versus map changes in terms of what the planning board recommendations have to consider. But specifically, and one of the most, again, is whether the change is consistent with the aims and principles embodied in the law. So what you're looking at is the particular change that's being reflected here. As relates to the Snowden Woods project, it has been presented as a text amendment to essentially change, but the point to note is they are in fact proposing a new section, which is 270-25A, and they are creating what they call a PDO, Preservation Density Overlay Zone. And I think it is a fair issue for discussion tonight as to whether that is in fact an amendment or in fact that is a map change, because it effectively just does change not just a use within the area, but in fact it affects the entire zone as to how we portray that zone. Also in terms of how we portray it in terms of our comprehensive plan, which is significant there. So I view a text amendment as a fairly, I don't want to say small change, but a change that is very particular and very laser-like with regard to what an applicant is coming before this board asking for.
And less material?
Less significant, I think I could say that. I think that might be a fair way to say it. Again, going back to McCluskey, putting in the term residential did not impact really those T-zones, because we already had other uses that permitted that.
By their very nature, T is two-family.
That's right, and we already had senior facilities that were allowed within that area, or other things that would have allowed certain residential type of facilities. The proposal here is beyond what you might have seen in that case. So I think that's a fair distinction between what you had in terms of a text amendment versus what you might potentially be looking at here. And as I said, if it's viewed as a map change or something along those lines, the factors to consider by this board, if it's ultimately to consider, are different than those to consider for a text amendment. Because 270-59A2 goes into those factors, which, as I said, similar but not in fact the same as were a simple text amendment.
So, just for clarity, a map change in my mind would be similar to changing the zoning, the underlying zoning.
Right.
Okay. Similar to what we used to have, where you had a, say, OR, but OR allowed for residential development based on a site plan approval.
Right.
Okay, so there is a difference.
Correct.
But the parameters might be different. So, okay, so.
How would you compare or contrast that to where you were to move a line on a map?
Well,
That's a clear map change?
that's also a map change.
Yeah.
I mean, that's also a map. So if you wanted to, let's say we wanted to extend the CDD zone into where the S125 is. Let's say that was the application. That's clearly a map change. You're changing the line on a map. You're changing where it would be. So you'd have the factors that are in the 270-59A2. Here, it's not just necessarily mapping, because you're changing, in many ways, the identity of the CDD zone. It's simple to look at that you're going from what is a least dense zone within the village, both under its comprehensive plan and clearly as the density that's in the code, to what would be a much denser location. And so it's not, in my discussion with Member Ludlam, it's not just a simple change. It's a more significant change to that particular zone, which obviously could impact other zones in there. It's not a map change in the sense that I'm not changing a line, but I am changing I'm changing in a sense what can be done with in that particular area.
Would that require the village board to approve it?
Yes. Any of these changes require village board would require village board approval, because it's in essence it's a change to the code, so the board would have to approve it. I can let you know that the folks who are primarily on Beach Road have already told me that they will be requesting a supermajority vote from the Board of Trustees when the text amendment, should the text amendment ultimately come before the board. That requires 20% of the adjoining property owners. I suspect, although they haven't done that yet, I suspect they will get those numbers from the assessor. And if that occurs, then that would require 4 affirmative votes by the trustees.
In your opinion, do the order of magnitude of proposed amendments to the zone text, are they relevant?
I think it has to have some role here. No, are you asking in terms of is it text versus you know, map or something like that, or?
If many zoning metric milestones are proposed to be altered as opposed to one, or a modification of a use that's allowed, is that relevant compared to, say, the McCluskey application, which touched
I think that's what
one?
we're here for. I think that's what we're here for. Okay, and so, you know, and that's really the determination. If this were a simple 1-for-1, not a bad thing. But when, you know, when we're looking at 6 units to the acre with bonuses up to 8, and this is, I mean, what is this proposal at?
16.
16, so
If
it's
you
double.
look on the attachment.
It's okay, it's good enough for now. Okay, it's that one piece is
significant.
They give you the
Well,
bulk
I
requirements
just- it's different.
for the PDO.
Right.
right? The second piece is that I think the current structure of most of the zone is for maximum 2.5 stories,
Right.
and this is a minimum of 4.
Right,
So, so that's 2.
right.
So the question is, you know, now, to go back to the supermajority, you know, if this board decides, yes, the text amendment is appropriate, goes to the village board does something, they need a supermajority. If this planning board decides that, no, it's not, it's a map change, and therefore needs to go through a zoning change process, the supermajority is still gonna be required.
Oh, there's no question.
Because
Yeah.
there's a set of neighbors that are not interested in anything happening except perhaps what the as-of-right development is.
Yeah, we've been put on notice. They'll apply the supermajority under any.
Right, so that, you know, is just interesting and know where we're gonna be. But it doesn't require a supermajority of this board,
No.
although by default at the moment, it does, because we don't have one extra. So, okay, so Lynn, why don't you just quickly tell us the overall view of the 2, is it just 2 districts involved that we're discussing?
Well, they suggest a change that it could be applicable to, and I was looking for a larger zoning map, it seems to have
It disappeared.
disappeared.
Well, we have the old one.
So I have a mini one.
I have it here on my- I have it on my computer.
Tell
So
us.
so
What do
basically,
we want? What do we-
they
Look
basically,
it up there.
Yeah,
Um,
you could.
they basically proposed an overlay zone that would be applicable to any lot that met special sub-requirements in the CDD district or the PW
So
districts.
how many CD districts do we have that are not developed today?
There are 2 CDD districts in the village.
And,
Where's the other one?
There are 2.
I was trying to
well,
find
there's
that.
one that's already got Avalon on it.
So, right, so there's one up further.
Right.
And this one outlined in yellow, where the pink is, that's the current CDD district.
Right.
Okay.
And above that is another CDD district, which, yes, is
That's Avalon,
Avalon.
right,
So
which is already
North
developed.
of that is OR, and then it's the
OR and
PR,
PRD.
whatever Mystic Point is.
PRD, yeah.
Okay. So there's only one remaining
Yeah.
CDD district.
But what about PW?
So PW, sorry, it's so small I could pass it around, are outlined in the blue. So there's PWA, PWB, and PWC. So this is PWA, just south of the site. This is PWB, more downtown and towards where Harbor Square is. And PWC is a little bit more inland. So for lack of a larger one, I can,
And so,
do you want to see
okay,
it?
so that's okay.
No, I just wanted to, well,
Yeah, go ahead.
of those other PW sites, A, B, and C, how many of those could be assembled into a district large enough to fall within this? Because it, under the proposed amendment, you would need to assemble 10 acres, 90 of which must be CDD or PW.
Zero.
You, no.
So the answer is not, none of those. Well, I guess you would need 9 acres because you could, 90% of your 10-acre site would have to,
No, you have to have 10, and then nine.
90% has to be PW or
Right,
CDD.
yeah, right.
So are any of those PW districts 9 acres?
I think the one just south of it is, unless.
The little
Because you
one,
could pull in another
The one
acre from
just
somewhere
south
else.
runs next
the
to the
little
other
one, it's the sliver that runs along, I can tell
It's not a
you.
sliver,
Yeah, that's 6 acres,
that's 6.
as I recall,
That's small.
but I could be wrong. This is the one that
And then
Roger
there's-
Pelton came in.
Right.
So yeah, other than that, that's the, there are a
It's
couple
not
of
10.
larger ones,
No.
but there could be an assemblage of multiple parcels, but unless you assemble multiple parcels that are currently in different ownerships right now.
I mean, that
you
would
wouldn't
have to be,
able to.
that would have to be
create
continuous,
this.
right? Yeah.
So that's an interesting question. So let's play that out for a minute. If you were to roll in that vacant lot, roll in the commercial building that's Axo Chemical now, and roll in the 10 acres or so that Hudson, oh no, what do we call it?
Riverwalk.
Snowden House.
Mhm.
Okay. So they're all 3 different owners, but the village could decide. Well, no, because those are not. Those are probably, the building next to the firehouse is probably OR still.
That's T,
Yes.
isn't it T?
To the west
No,
of
the one
firehouse.
next to it is,
There's a little sliver.
you're talking where
Looks like it's all
the,
CDD.
that's on the
Yeah,
other side,
CDD.
that's the other side of the
So it's all
firehouse?
CDD.
It's CDD.
Okay.
Would you like to?
So
see
you have
it?
so we have a non-conforming use maybe in the middle of this.
Right.
And Mr. DeVore's property is CDD.
Right,
See
so
Right.
there's a more close, so.
Right, so all of this, so Jeff's got a good map here. So it takes into account, for the purposes of discussion, it takes into account the Wonderlic property,
Right,
et
Mhm.
cetera, are all CDD.
right.
So this conceivably could apply to that as well. So you can essentially transform the CDD, every piece of the CDD, into double what we have today.
Because if this is 14 acres, CDD extends all the way down
Mhm.
Yeah,
and
Until
all the
it
way
hits
out
the-
to,
yeah, the other property.
well, this is like Crawbucky,
Sorry,
oh, I guess
It abuts.
Crawbucky Park?
Hidden Cove.
Yeah, Crowbarkey is the green,
That's,
or whatever, you don't
Yeah.
have it.
And also Hidden Cove, because it's a PW district,
Mhm.
Right.
would be affected by
By
this,
this.
could be affected in.
If
one
they
way
could
or the
assemble
other.
10 parcels,
Yeah.
or 10 acres,
Ten
They-
acres.
they-
9 of which are
I think they
CDD or
But
PW.
they may be close. If they roll all of them
Could we
together.
get
that one's,
like a list
That
of
includes the
all
plateau.
the
Right.
parcels in these 2 districts?
yeah, that in, you got it.
We can?
And their acreage?
I think it's as an addendum to one of the documents online.
Well,
Jeff, so you wanted the acreage of the different PWs and all the
And
properties?
I guess any,
All the parcels?
All the
and
parcels.
all their acreage.
yeah.
Okay,
In all this, in the CDD and all the PWs?
Yeah, I guess anything that this would apply to.
Is that a scoping task? isn't that a scoping?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know that,
We don't have to do it. We
Right.
can-
Well,
We should know it, but they
Well,
can, they
I
can.
mean,
talk
just in
with-
terms of answering the
but
preliminary
there are two
question.
pieces.
You're absolutely right.
Well, no, yes, because you're making a decision on a text amendment that applies to all of this. The scoping document, yes, could be in there too. So we could add that in, but if we're looking, we have to come up with a recommendation before that. Right? There's these parallel things that are running. Village board wants a recommendation on this, and they also want to know if we have any input into the scoping document. So the recommendation that we have, may be that we don't have an opinion until the scoping document is complete and we see more data.
Right.
yeah, I don't know how you do that.
I mean,
I don't know how you not do that.
well,
Part of the questions in this short-term thing we're answering is,
so there is an answer, a very short, superficial answer, is do we believe that based upon what we know about those various parcels, that if assembled in 10-acre chunks, should convert from 6 to 8 units to the acre to whatever the proposed density is here,
16 per acre.
including the clauses that say to get there, you have to do the following things. One of them is to produce off-site capital improvements.
Right.
Second one is an increase from 10 units, from 10% to 20% affordable housing.
15.
15.
You said 15.
So are those, are the two, the capital improvements and the affordable housing, along with some planning definition that we would write, would somehow balance out, and for us to be able to say that, yes, we still believe this is a conservation district, because at the end of the day, that's what it's supposed to be. And accept all of those other provisions.
Does the building of the firehouse,
Take that off the table.
that doesn't count as a capital
Well,
improvement?
it would, but then you still have to consider what capital improvements would go along with those other developments.
And then they also proposed.
I think the firehouse confuses it.
Yeah. They also proposed to preserve 30% of the gross assemblage as public open space or park. To just add to your public
Right.
website.
But what does the CDD require?
You already have to preserve it.
Right, that's nothing. So if we were to look at the table, it says CDD today.
Mhm.
To get CDD, you're required to do the following. And then if we were to have a table that says
Mhm.
new zone, what are the bonuses that the community benefits?
Say that again?
It's just simple, right? It's math, right? So CDD says these are the things that you must meet in order to get the clustered densities of 6 to 8 units. Then there's the overlay zone that says you must do this. Now, interestingly, I think that the current PW districts, if assembled to more than 3 acres or something, you derive even greater density than this would allow you to overlay.
Mhm.
But you must do this to move the needle must be aligned or support the initiatives, some initiatives, as laid out in the comprehensive
Yes,
plan.
that's true. So all of this is based upon what was the village thinking when it adopted CDD? And what's changed to say, now, but first of all, you have to decide whether this is a significant change, right? I mean, I don't know. So if we believe that it sounds like it is, because to go from 8 to 16, that sounds pretty big to me. But I don't know. I don't know what we're preserving, I don't know, I mean, what is the increase in the public benefit from doing that versus?
As supported by the comprehensive plan.
Right, that's right. So that's what I say, is that, the comprehensive plan and the CDD were rather specific about why the density was designed the way it is. The test that was already done seems to get it to work reasonably with Avalon.
But this dialogue, this
Yeah,
discussion.
I mean, I'm looking at also, this dialogue is sort of important, but we have to also look at what is it that we had in the waterfront document that actually was voted on the Snowden area. It actually says that major portion abutting Trowbucky should be kept as a natural area, right? I mean, there's a very specific suggestions, not only suggestions, but this is what we want, this is what's voted on. So we're not only saying it's just a CDD district, but it's a clear definition of what we perceive that particular district to be.
Right.
So I think
But I think I can't speak for them. What I've heard both last week and watching the proceedings on TV is that they're suggesting that they are preserving a majority of the site. I'm using their words, not, these aren't my words.
No, I understand it.
As a notion to that requirement. Where I was headed is this dialogue seems to confirm the prototypical path, which is you vet what the modifications and the amendments could be to a zone,
Mhm.
and then you extract a project that the municipality, in this case the Village of Ossining, feels like they're activating toward the mission of their comprehensive plan.
And I think you're right. It didn't dawn on me until you showed me the map that a very large chunk remains to be CDD with some very difficult natural terrain. And this would apply to that as well. And so what to what Kaya said is, if we were to look at the waterfront plan, which says largely conserve it as natural, what we need is to hear how this does that.
Of course.
No, I think that's.
All right, and it's hard to fathom 8 to 16 as doing that.
Having,
Even if you put the buildings are high and narrow, there's still traffic and people.
Well, I had gotten a FOIL request which asked for a lot of the documents relating to the CDD. And Lynn was helpful on this, but if you go through the drafts, it wasn't originally called the CDD, it was going to be part of the PW, whatever, but it was made very clear what that district was for and what that district was to preserve. You can read in the final comprehensive plan, but you can also read in all the earlier iterations.
Right, I found the visioning draft
Mhm.
tonight. I was trying to find what
You were
was the
there for
original.
some of it.
Right, so,
And obviously that's, that's where it all comes down to, because you want to, and I think that's part of both here and also in the scope, which is essentially, how do you marry what you're proposing to do to what our comprehensive plan says, and I think, John, you're right. The position that the applicant, and I don't want to put words in their mouth either, but has been is that, well, we're really, it's gonna still be a CDD district, it's gonna be, let's say, a different CDD district, but still gonna be a CDD district. But we still have in our books what that district is supposed to be. And, how do we, is it to be changed in this particular way? Because you're right, there are other properties, there's a property on the other side, which is for sale now, which is also in the CDD district, and has, and potentially could affect as we go towards Plateau and you go in that direction. Or up towards the S-125s that go towards Beach. So all that is involved. So, all those elements are here.
Do those parcels connect?
Which parcels?
The one that's on the, abuts the extension of Van Wyck Street and Snowden Avenue?
The Riverwalk.
This parcel that we're talking about now does not connect with those parcels. There's another parcel in between, which is the divided parcel, Snowden, so whatever it's, Snowden Associates.
That doesn't that have frontage?
That has, no, it has a very slim
Yeah.
piece that fronts onto.
Beach.
No, not onto Beach, onto Van Wyck.
Oh,
Van Wyck.
okay.
Does?
And then there's two houses right next to it.
There's no houses.
I wish I had the.
No, it's,
Do you want
it's,
to hear?
Is
it's
Firehouse.
Firehouse, then there's the business, and then there's
No,
Whatever
no,
that
it's
is.
the DeVore property,
Okay.
Riverwalk.
Does that connect to this parcel?
I'd have to,
Does Riverwalk connect to
in
this
the,
parcel?
I wonder, if in the,
It might
in the back, it might be
It
contiguous
might.
to it. In the back, it might, towards the rear,
It
it might
in
be.
the back.
Because it's all, at the end, it's
At
all
the end, 'cause-
CDD, so it's
'cause
possible
At
they
the
do.
end of Beach would be where Riverwalk connects, so it would not be very well used.
So
No, it can't be Beach.
No,
part of the
Sorry,
dialogue,
Riverwalk.
again, going back to what in
That's
my
right.
experience, I've understood this process to really be born.
Right.
So if a municipality
It's the.
sees an opportunity
No, this is the zoning. That's
That's the
developed at the only frontage.
to
that has
enhance
this.
or activate,
You know,
to
those two
activate
houses.
But this
a
connects to the
parcel.
area.
Right.
It doesn't connect to
Yes.
them.
by incorporating text changes
But it also connects.
that
And there's-
promote
That's,
the municipality's priorities and initiatives.
Right.
yeah. Okay.
And
Connects to Plateau.
modify zoning text elements that incentivize developers to synchronize with that. That's the opportunity here.
Correct.
Can I ask a question?
I just think it got off to a bad start.
I don't want to interrupt if you're still.
You got off to a bad start?
No, I'm thinking out loud and
No,
I'm
that's okay.
speaking and I'm thinking opportunities and what the core, I think, initiative wants to be here, could be here, and how we're trying to clear some of the fog off the table.
I think part of it is that what is overarching is everybody hears 198 units in 5 buildings, and we're not there. We're at the, what do we do with the zone, not,
Right,
What could you
and rightly or wrongly.
as you said, what do you pull out of it rather than the other way around?
And rightly and wrongly, the fire station is in tow. The proposed fire station is in tow in the dialogue, and it just is.
But it would be in any of those other ones if they chose
Some
to
amenity.
overlay. If they chose to do this in any of the other parcels, they got their 10 acres, they would have to come up with the same rubric as this parcel did. If we believe that that's the case. The other part of the case is that almost every development that we do has some municipal benefit attached to it.
Right, but they could have selected a wide range.
That's
It
right.
could have been a community environmental center and enhanced,
So,
as opposed to a fire
So if
station.
we were to look at, we get off the path, but Jeff, you should go before.
Well, actually, this is kind of related to sort of what John was asking. There's a definition in the proposed text of qualified developments, and it talks about you need to assemble these 10 acres.
Yes.
But in addition to that, you have to provide the off-site benefit and there's affordable housing. Once a applicant assembles the necessary acres, so this is an overlay district, so before they're into PDO overlay, they're potentially not there yet. They don't have all the acres. As soon as they have that, in what context, does this something that comes before the planning board? Is it, who decides about the off-site benefit? Is that gonna be the planning board?
Well, it depends, because suppose somebody else comes out and builds you a new police station, new municipal building. So the amenity is not necessarily just ours, right?
I guess-
Right.
So it's derived, the approval is, it's almost, I think, Jeff, you're almost as if this, no matter what we do with this overlay district, at the end of the day, if there's an off-site municipal benefit of capital type, the village board would have to weigh in. Because all the other ones that we do, for example, I'm not sure how we got into Harbor Square to do the Snowden Avenue
The relining.
relining, except that they needed water and they needed to clear it, it's gotta come in that
Right.
direction. So they had to do something in order that, without doing it, they wouldn't be able to build.
Right.
In this case, they can build, they just have to build less. Right, they could go in tomorrow, in theory, and put whatever 8 units to the acre.
Just do the
tomorrow.
site plan application.
Done.
And-
Theoretically, you're right. They could just come in with an
So-
application.
so-
It's
show
on the
they-
way out onto Beach Road, it's as of right.
So
Well,
my
no,
question
they
is-
need zoning board for frontage. They would use zoning board for frontage.
Yeah, but that's,
would all, like the benefit that would be negotiated in a site plan application to the planning board?
It might be in a land acquisition and development agreement with the village, like we have with Harbor Square. They had a ladder and it had things in there, and that's
It was-
all part of it.
Right, run concurrent.
I suspect the mechanism would be that in order to, and it probably would have to have some enabling, that if you wanted to do this, you would have to go to the village board first.
I'm just saying, because I don't see that here.
And have it referred.
I don't see there's anything in this text about going to the village board first. Or that the village board shall approve the off-site benefit.
Well, yeah. They're not gonna build a benefit, they're not gonna offer, without somebody, that, they're not gonna say, come in, well, I'm just gonna put any kind of firehouse. Because, for example, let's put fires for a second. They're not just gonna build a firehouse that's gonna have to be done to certain, specs or whatever, anything like that. But you're right, ultimately, there has to be has to be some sort of approval that would have to be, put into whatever their text is. Does it come back here, does it go with the village board, all different things.
The other question I have is this proposed text, assuming the village board goes forward, they can alter and amend what's been proposed here and adopt something else, right?
Yes, and just so you know, when we did Cardinal McCluskey, what the applicant proposed and what ultimately got approved, it had the basics, but it was not the same. So yeah, this is a proposal. I mean, at the end of the day, based upon recommendations from this board and what the Board of Trustees ultimately decides, this can be significantly changed. This is just they're required to make a proposal, but it doesn't mean that it can't be touched. It's subject to revision.
So the recommendation could be, again, I'm speaking out loud, thinking out loud. A recommendation could be, potentially a zone text change could be crafted around an appropriate set of incentives and constraints that are consistent with the planning board's view of initiatives and priorities set forth in the comprehensive plan.
Right.
Yes.
So if we use the one that we've already mapped out, Avalon.
Mhm.
So Avalon changed, they are at essentially 8 units to the acre. They deeded back to the village 8 or 11 acres of forever natural parkland. So they went from 6 to 8 units. They gave back the property.
And they preserved.
And they also were working on this, but
Connect.
they were
Connection.
supposed to be
Connected.
connection
To Crowbucky.
to the Crowbucky Beach.
Right.
So those, and there may have been some capital work that they did too, in order to get the plumbing out of the place, because everything is downhill. So the model is already there, so the question is, so if all of that's in place already, the real delta here is, there'll be some deeded back land, perhaps, and some off-site capital improvement. And so if, for example, we like the idea of the increased affordable housing, and instead of getting a 10% bonus, which is what you get a 15% bonus over what exists. And then you tell me what capital, what public benefit do we get as a community? Because affordable housing is no longer a public benefit, it's an act you have to fulfill. So then you have to demonstrate either recreation or something that's equivalent to what we already achieved. Right? And so that could be a text amendment. Because you've only increased it by 5% essentially over, you haven't did 100% increase. So I don't know what, we have to come to some decision, not necessarily tonight, but we have to come to it reasonably soon, as to, one, do we actually think this is a text amendment?
Or could be.
Or, well, no, as it's proposed.
Well,
is
see,
it-
that's where this
is it a
keeps
text
going.
amendment? And if it-
Back-
and if the answer is no, as it's proposed, it's not a text amendment, it's a map change. Or it's a different kind of floating zone that has different requirements on it. That's one. If two is if we were to adjust some of the parameters that have been proposed to make it, I'm not even going to use the word, that align closer to the existing zoning, then that becomes a text amendment. But how many, and I think you started down this road earlier today, when it was, how many of these incremental things add up, little changes, add up to a big enough that make a difference, right?
Right, and/or potentially, once you've identified those,
Yep.
can you mitigate, or can you offer mitigation, counter mitigation, or enhancements beyond mitigation? That again, that extract the initiatives from the comprehensive plan, that otherwise may never have been realized.
Right, and so you'd have to articulate what those would be.
Right. So,
And going back to not this, because the parcel we're actually talking about is a rather simple one. Actually, it's pretty straightforward, right? You knock down the firehouse, you get a way in, and you build this thing. The rest of that, CDD, not so simple. Really complicated.
you mean the rest of the potential?
But because it's all CDD, all of that property that goes back and abuts
Well,
the code,
I
all the
think,
way down to Virion,
Yes.
it's all CDD.
Yeah.
So,
so that has to be addressed, I
Right,
mean,
that's what I'm saying.
it needs to be addressed as a part of the scoping
Right.
vetting.
so that's why I said, so when you look at the bigger envelope, the problem is harder to solve.
I mean, there's a number of things that are also there. We have topography issues, right? I mean, and we have wetlands. I mean, there's a number of things. I know that they have sort of in their preliminary plans, and we can't really not talk about what they're thinking they want to do if we are gonna see, start trading incentives. And that is where it becomes difficult.
And I think that, and if we go to the parcel, we're not talking about this little sliver of DeVoe. I mean, it's clear that the right development use for that is cluster, tall, not spread out. It preserves more of the character, but it was never discussed to double the density, right? And so that's a trade-off. So you could see a text amendment that said, based on topography, the 2.5-story facilities is waived to some number that evens it out over time, but you don't change the density, right? So that allows clustering, allows more preservation, it doesn't increase the traffic flow, it doesn't do anything, right? So that's one. The overarching question is when we do this, was the intention to cluster everything? Because quite honestly, we're not building any single-family anything. And at the end of the day, does that make sense?
Do you think we have a consensus right now to answer the first question from the village?
Which is, does as proposed stand the text amendment? I don't know. We can find out.
I'm not prepared.
I am not prepared either. I think there are too many variables.
You're not prepared to answer that?
I'm not prepared to say yes or no at this moment.
I'm not either.
Okay.
I think more time is good to think
Yeah.
about this.
And I don't mean that
I
to
just-
be, to deflect it down the road. That's what the work session's for.
Right.
Kind of
So-
Kicking around.
So what
And that
would
also
change?
might require of me to give to you folks an opinion, a legal opinion as to essentially
Absolutely.
what does mean this versus that. If it's incremental,
Right.
sort of, and I can do that so that you guys can have that in your hands, which may help you as well to sort of formulate it.
So I think, though, and I think that's really useful, and I think it's useful to marry the comprehensive plan and the waterfront development district plan,
Right.
and what the intentions are, and how does this map. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think this is a text amendment, because I don't think you can double the density in that district and decide that the elements of the conservation district stand.
Yeah, I
And that's
agree.
hard for me
Don't
to
see how-
say.
Yeah.
I think you can find your way there. I think you can find your way there in a way that benefits the village behind several comprehensive plans, goals, and initiatives. Potentially, I do. But I'm not prepared to say, I'm still confused, I'm still
But-
mired.
But why would you?
Yes.
Pardon?
Why would you do that? I mean, I understand it, because I struggle with this, but I come back to the environmental conditions are still gonna be impacted.
And but maybe the opportunity is to impact them, believe it or not, in a positive way.
So
An
if,
example?
yeah,
I think if you said, here's a parcel that is a conservation development district that embodies a site-sensitive, park-like atmosphere, but it's never really been afforded access to members of the community. Right? And perhaps in the way that Avalon listened and then crafted and then lent part of their project towards towards an enhanced environment for the
Right.
community, that I think there are those opportunities on the site, whether it be, albeit a nature center, an enhanced wetlands program, an aggressive bird sanctuary program that actually promotes and supports bird migration and bird reproduction, as opposed to a,
And that's fine. I get that. But the example you use is at 8 units to the acre. And they've done, except for the active, which, by the way, it's not clear to me how you would mandate that in an ordinance that says, because an active bird sanctuary, et cetera, requires somebody to staff it, somebody to do all of that. And so you can create that, but does that make it impossible to do?
I don't know about impossible. Is it a real world challenge?
Yes.
Perhaps. But I'm not being naive, and I'm.
No,
I mean, we're talking about their proposal as being,
No, be
that
broader,
massive,
go
in the
broader.
broad,
You
right?
gotta go all
And then
the way.
we're going, and then we're saying, this is what the 8, 8 unit per acre, whatever we have here. Now, you're saying, if I understand you correctly, that there might be a middle way.
Yes.
And I think we're all saying that what we are sort of stuck with is this presentation they came with that already was almost developed, or it looked like it was. It has some massing that they wanted to have. If we take both approaches, saying, what is it that we want to preserve? Comprehensive plan, our whole waterfront, the documents that we should stand by. And then take Avalon as an example. Then we can basically go from the backwards and say that will almost leave them X number of units. I'm not saying we're dictating anything about how many units they would want to apply for, but it almost means that we can go backwards and say, this is what we come to in order to preserve what we are bound to preserve. And it gives these limitations. And it doesn't mean that they're stiff and immalleable, but it does mean that there are that we can put some limitations. Can you work with that?
I agree. I think, again, in my humble opinion, that's the entire core concept of this process. And what was confused by being front-end loaded with a more than conceptual project, with traffic studies being provided and
Without a text amendment.
without a text amendment.
Is this all faithful to our mission for tonight?
Yeah, I think it's we need to come to some conclusion. We apparently, at the moment, need more information to determine whether this could, at some, well, let's put it this way. I think, John, where you are at the moment is that as the proposal stands, this could be a text amendment. With,
I wouldn't phrase it that way.
okay, so.
Because there's no proposal.
Well, no, but there is. There's a document that says, this is what they want to get, this is what they're going to do, and that's the text amendment. So the question is that whatever the maximum of 16 units to the acre, I guess that's the number, a substantial off-site municipal capital project, and 15% affordable housing, I think, are the three main components. So those three elements tied together are what they're proposing as the text amendment. And some of us here think that that's a lot more than when you take the entire parcel that we're talking about, because it runs from there all the way down to the bottom of Snowden Avenue in a very interesting terrain. And I agree that maybe, maybe clustering higher is better than broad, but I don't know that it ever gets me to double. And that's why I said, as it stands today, I think if we were to ask engineers to lay out what could happen, we would not come to that conclusion. We didn't come to that conclusion 7 years ago when we thought carefully about this zone. And now, and you're right, forget about what the capital improvement is. All we know is that every one of these projects, as they come in, will have to have a capital improvement that's not on the site to benefit the community. And you're right, if we add in those very active environmental things that we don't have today, that might mitigate this, right? Because at the end of the day, there's a trade-off. Somebody's got to pay, you got to pay for it somehow. How do you pay? Right?
Right, and
And
I'm
it's
not
important.
suggesting that's the only thing, but when you, but if you distill it into the form and the formula that you just recited, I can't get there yet.
That, when you say get there yet, that it's a text amendment? or-
Yes.
Okay. I'm sort of leaning more towards the idea that a text amendment is more, whether it is or it isn't, is more of a technical issue than an issue of the magnitude of what's being proposed. Whereas I see a text amendment as literally, it could be as simple as deleting some words and replacing them with some different words. So, just in the simplest example, it says residential, delete that and replace it with commercial. Or it could be as simple as the permitted density is 6 units per acre, and you literally, you want to cross out 6 and change it and replace it with something else. Because all you're doing is changing the text of the zoning code provisions themselves. And so I think what's proposed here, if you compare it to the CDD, the existing text of the CDD and the appendices that are sort of incorporated into that, a lot of what's here is the same, like the accessory uses. You can compare the permitted uses are the same. So I sort of see what's being proposed here as I think a way to interpret it is, it's a, like a special version of the CDD. It's like got the characteristics of a CDD, but with some changes. And I think there's a way you could get to characterizing those changes as simply textual, as opposed to a wholesale zoning change. I mean, that's sort of the way I'm.
You may well be right, and that's why I'll give you the memo. I will say this, though. I think that if you were to go change the word residential to commercial, you've effectively changed the zone.
Yes.
I mean, you've and while it's not maybe changing a map, if I were to make a T-zone suddenly a business central zone or a general that changes the entire character of that zone. That's
You
a
made a really
difference.
good point, but I don't think that was the best example.
But I do know
No,
what you're saying.
but I
do
want to use that example because if we're talking about at some point,
Right.
if the interpretation needs to be, and this is what you're saying to me, at some point you pass some threshold
Well, that's
of changes, and now it's not no longer a text amendment. I wonder where can that threshold even be defined, or is it just sort of you know it when you see it?
I think you got it. I think you know, for example, if the conservation district outlines, preserving, land, low density, low occupancy, minimally invasive, development, and then you go to something that's a much higher use, is that still a text amendment, just because you changed 8 to 16?
Right. But, well, I guess
It
my-
is or it isn't if it follows the prerequisite mechanism. And you've got to get through the prerequisite mechanism to make it a simple word change or any other metric change.
Well, I guess my question is, some of these things about the magnitude of what's proposed really go to whether or not it's wise, and that's a different, whether you ought to change the zoning to that is a different issue than whether or not what's proposed is or isn't a text
Well,
amendment.
but it's bigger than that, because a text amendment is a simple thing to do, and it's easy to achieve.
I don't think so.
A zoning change is a very complicated process.
I think you're missing the threshold points, the threshold concepts. If the zone text proposal is not in the context of the comprehensive plan, then it's all moot, no matter whether you're changing simple words or not, or altering the metrics
So
or
then
not.
our study should shift to what the comprehensive plan for that area asks for, and I think we heard it.
I guess what I would just, last thing, just to follow up on that, is whether or not it fits within the comprehensive plan, I think goes to whether or not you ought to do it. But I don't know if that changes the characteristic of whether it's a text amendment or not. I'm just putting that out there because I.
Well, but if it's contrary to your comprehensive plan, it's effectively changing a zone at that point. Because your comprehensive plan is your overarching document, as you know, which determines what everything else happens. So if you're changing, if you're effectively saying, well, I don't want, we now have either a different view of our comprehensive plan, it's sort of a chicken and egg type thing. But if your comprehensive plan and your zoning code needs to march with your comprehensive plan. If you don't, that's where you get into problems. And if you're going to make a change, which effectively, if this board were to say, well, this is not consistent with our comprehensive plan, our comprehensive plan says this, then the applicant's going to have to demonstrate, and that's part of the scoping, how do you fit within, what you proposed, how do you fit within a comprehensive plan?
Right, but I don't
Yeah.
want to oversimplify the
No,
context
no.
of relating to the comprehensive plan.
No.
Because it's not a bunch of cubby holes that you can take in and out,
Right.
or take a proposal or a zone text change
Right.
and put in this slot or pull out and put in this slot. It's still about understanding the broader notions of the comprehensive plan.
Could I just ask then a question?
You can ask anything.
Yes.
If it's not what is the universe of possible types of zoning changes? There's zoning text amendments, and then is everything else, because we give the example of a map change,
And it's
but
basically,
are there other types of changes that are not map
no,
changes?
it comes one of the two. It's either
It's
you're
one or
changing
the
the
other.
map, or you're making a text change.
Or a variance.
Well, but a variance is not,
separate.
it's not a.
Right, but
So-
I mean, they could.
Because at the end of the day is, ultimately it is a.
It is a variance.
So it's either a
It's a
map,
special-
I guess this goes back to,
Sorry.
it's either a map change or a text change.
Right.
And so, if it's consistent with the comprehensive plan to move the boundary of one zone by several blocks, then moving that boundary, so effectively change the lines on the map, would be a map change. And to do that, it would have to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. So whether or not it's consistent with the comprehensive plan has nothing to do with whether it's a map change. A proposal to move a line on the map is a map change. Whereas,
Both text and map change. One of the elements for the board to consider is consistency with the comprehensive plan. But interesting, the wording is slightly different. For text change, it's whether the proposed amendment is consistent with the aims of the comprehensive plan of the village and the LWRP. For a zoning map change, it's whether the effect of the proposed amendment upon growth of the village as envisioned by the comprehensive plan and the LWRP. It's actually a different, it's slightly different in terms of what they're looking at.
Well, I need to reread those.
yeah.
Okay, sure.
That makes sense to me.
For a for a proposed amendment to, or change to the text of the zoning code, one of the four elements to consider is whether the proposed amendment is consistent with the aims of the comprehensive plan of the village and the LWRP. Concerning a proposed amendment involving a change in the map, one of the things to consider is the effect of the proposed amendment upon the growth of the village as envisioned by the comprehensive plan and the LWRP. So one is consistent, one you're also looking towards a growth, which is something that we've
Then
had
that
some
maybe,
discussions.
that might have answered my question here, because
Okay.
then maybe it's not a text amendment if it would change the growth
Or the.
or have an impact
Or
on
the,
that.
it's more it
Future
seems
impact.
more like it's more the intent. The second one is more of the intent. It's less tangible in terms of nuts and bolts, right?
Well, it's interesting because, I'll just give you an example, Kaya. Under a text change, for example, you have to consider the areas, land uses, buildings, and establishments that will be directly affected. But for zoning text, you now have to consider, are there adequate public school facilities and other public facilities, including parks, roads that exist in that area? Whether, so it's a much broader on a map change in terms of what you have to look at. Schools are not referenced in the first element, but they are.
So,
Yeah.
so our
Sorry.
friends in the school board will
I'll
be
be
clearly
thrilled to hear what I just-
leaning toward
I'm
map
sure.
change. I mean, I think for me, that clarifies it a lot more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
helps.
Yeah. definitely.
I see no way that, in my mind, that this is a text change based upon what you read.
Can I have the section number?
Sure.
Sure.
270-59.
Because I think a strong case can be made for the growth of the village
270-59?
to map change,
A1 and 2.
but I don't think it can be made. So I don't know.
Do you need
I want
see
to,
if you
yeah, I
wanna
think we
see
should,
it right
I, just to go back to what we said before, I think we need to.
Yeah,
think
no,
about-
we're not gonna decide tonight. but
No,
we're gonna-
and I'll supplement it to you with, stuff
Yeah,
tonight, but
all
I'm
right,
fine.
so I think we've made progress. Thank you, John, for poking at this, and then poking at Stuart, and we got good information. So, so we all have something to think about between now and, we should do this,
For the 27th?
Yeah.
You want to, okay.
we'll just do it after the meeting, okay? And then we'll decide then if we need one more work session,
Well,
then we'll have to decide
There's not
at
much
the
time
March
between.
meeting.
Well, there's no March meeting because it's March 8th is the final scope unless they extend it further.
Well,
So.
clearly they need,
Okay?
I mean, they could go without the recommendation of the planning board if they want, but I don't think we're gonna get there between now and then.
And we couldn't meet one more time before
could.
our regular meeting.
We could,
I don't have
but there's
the-
not that much time
I
left.
left my
Right.
calendar upstairs.
I almost think we should. I mean, also because this is fresh in our
I
minds.
mean, you could do it if somebody's available next week.
Mhm.
I think
We
I
could
left my
do it,
calendar upstairs, but
but
I think
after
there's
that,
not
it gets
gonna,
a little
it's
hairy.
not gonna work.
So-
Because next week there's
Monday,
a
Tuesday,
HPC
Wednesday.
meeting on Monday. Tuesday
Yeah.
is a EAC meeting. The following week on Tuesday, the 12th, is the 13th, sorry,
ZBA.
is a ZBA meeting.
What about another Monday?
Monday.
The 11th?
No, that's the
Monday the
is
12th
HB.
is, Monday the 12th, Monday the 12th.
Why do I feel like there's something?
Is that a holiday?
Look, why don't you look and see?
Oh, yeah, that's
I'll
the
let
other
you
day
know.
that's optional, yeah. I think we can do the Monday that,
Monday the
All
12th is
right,
also.
so that'll be
Well-
good. We can do it, and that'll leave us at our regular meeting, be able to adopt whatever we're gonna send to the
Okay,
board.
that's
Right, exactly.
And you can, and make
So-
comments with regard to the
Right,
draft scope.
Right.
yeah. So I think that's gonna be derived from this, it's gonna be interesting because, it's, you know,
So-
based upon our recommendation, it's gonna be, the scope needs to be changed to, from a text amendment to a scope, to a map change.
and you want, and all of you want to see the list
Yeah.
of all the parcels and their acreage for every parcel in the PW districts and the CDT districts, right?
Yeah, like that.
And that little text, some of the stuff that I asked you to look at, that you didn't pass out tonight, we should include that too.
This,
Which-
for the
Yeah.
size of the
Yeah,
other
that's
sites?
right, so that
Yeah.
shows what developments exist.
Okay,
I
do
just-
you want me to
I
read
also-
them off now, or do you
When we
know?
were just talking about getting that list, there was a comment that that was gonna be part of the scoping, but I actually only see the scoping requires identification and describing all zoning districts within a half-mile of the project site.
No, I said it should be a part of the
Yeah, so just in terms of
That's why-
like getting together our comments that we wanna make on the draft scoping, that it should include every possible,
Well, any
You know,
zone, any
parcel that
parcel
could be
that's
affected by the
right.
proposed.
Any zone that would be
Yeah.
touched by this,
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's fine.
Okay, yeah,
Do you want this size, or do you
well,
want
yeah,
just?
no, I think that's
Yeah.
useful to everybody.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But yeah.
You want to just send it out via email?
Now, so I have a question. Is the village board expecting to do this text change with in-house personnel, or are they gonna go hire somebody else? I don't need an answer tonight,
Good.
Yeah.
but it
I
seems
think we have an
like,
answer.
there's a lot to do in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's easier to do it yourself, to try to explain to a consultant what you want. But, okay, so good, so we're gonna try to shoot for the 12th,
That's fine.
and hope for no snow. Okay. So I think there are a lot of valid questions raised.
And I think one
Yeah,
thing we have
I-
agreed on, though, is that any reference in the draft scope to the 198 units, it's not, this is not the document,
Right.
this is not the document.
Right.
There-
That is, and that I
So-
think has been
Right.
clarified.
But I think John's
we all
point is that
understand
we
that.
initially got off on the left
Yeah.
foot, but we'll get back.
But the notion of scale
We've talked about that on other matters as well.
It's good, it's good. right?
Yes.
Because just, if you have to put a water line in, because you have to put a water line in, that doesn't count toward your capital improvement. It's gotta be for the true public
Public
benefit,
benefit.
not self-serving.
Right.
Okay. So I signed these, Lynn.
Are we talking about
Did you vote?
this?
Well, I don't know.
The draft
You wanna talk about
I
the
mean,
draft?
could,
That's the
but I don't know if
thing.
we really can to the full extent until we get this other part ironed out. But if you have comments already,
Go for
Were
it.
were you expecting us to?
If you have comments, I'm happy to get them and get them recorded tonight. It'll make it that much easier for me as we proceed. Sure.
Is it appropriate to send them via email to you?
I'm welcome to get it from you,
Oh, yes,
absolutely,
yeah.
please.
Okay.
Do you want to go through it now, or did you not?
well, you got the first one, right? Well, at least the first one we just talked about on zoning.
Under description. Yeah.
The description.
My,
So I think, okay, so they actually already asked the question about describe when a text amendment can be applied. Now, that's the cart before the horse,
Right,
because this should be here.
right.
Because we have to answer that question,
Yes.
at least from our point.
Because that also then affects what factors you have to consider in terms of your recommendation.
so this draft scoping document so far has been circulated just internally?
No,
No.
it was the subject of the public hearing that was held on December 19th.
Okay.
Excuse me, 13th. I have the transcript of that if folks would like it in electronic form. I'm happy to send it. It's not lengthy, but because,
There are several, and this is,
but this was prepared before the hearing. So it does not, it doesn't have the comments that came from the hearing.
And it was also circulated to all the involved and interested agencies.
so for example, page 4, page 4, outline item 3, chapter 3, item C. What does that mean?
Mitigation measures, is that what you're looking at?
Pardon?
Which one are you looking at?
Discuss and evaluate mitigation measures to minimize any potential adverse impacts
There's
to
no
the
adverse.
village zoning code, including use of green technologies.
Is that the one here?
No,
that
C.
one down there, okay.
I don't understand what that means.
Well, for example, if you had composting on the site,
I
it
think
wouldn't affect the code.
I think it's two sentence fragments merged together that are from different comments.
These are proposed by the applicant, this draft.
Yes.
Right,
Yes.
yeah.
Because I just, everything in here really relates to the proposed 198 unit
Right. But remember, the
development at the
firehouse. Remember, the
firehouse.
final scope is the village's document. So ultimately,
Yeah,
it's,
so-
but you're right. I mean, part of it is we have them prepare the draft because just how that, from that perspective.
So B on 5
Mhm.
needs to be broadened,
Okay, got it.
because it's Beach Road, Sandy Drive, Hudson River, Van Wyck Street, Snowden Avenue. I mean, it's North Water Street, it's the railroad, Metro North.
And this EIS for the text amendment,
Right.
just to go back to clarify,
Go ahead.
is a whole environmental review that'll culminate in the village board taking a vote on whether or not to adopt the text amendment. And then, when a site plan application is filed, could trigger an EIS for that proposed site, the second EIS.
Right. It's not,
Because the way this is sort of written, it's like a.
the applicant would like the EIS that they're gonna help prepare to effectively cover a site plan and a text amendment. The difficulty is, again, there's no site plan application currently out there.
So if we were to look at E on 6,
Mm-hmm.
this now applies to all of the PW and CBD
Right.
districts. I don't know what you do with 2 on page 7. Well, it says.
Yeah, how do you,
Right,
right, I mean, that goes to what Jeff, the observation Jeff made, I think all of us at one point have made. This document has 1 foot on the platform, 1 on the train.
That's right.
What has to be made clear to the folks doing it, when they do, their EIS, because they're doing an overall, let's say text, whatever, is the environmental impact, that global change.
Right.
They have to get through that. Then they have to get through whether there's going to be a change to the code. And then with that, they can come and they can present, they can put a site plan before and go that route. We're not there yet. We don't even have, we have a concept plan, which is what you guys have in there. And there've been multiple concept plans from these folks in the past. This one is up to 198 units. Other ones have been far fewer units.
I don't know how we do this, but somebody needs to go through this with a pen and strike things out.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because it talks about the Croton Aqueduct, which is sort of interesting, but how the project will interface with the existing Croton Aqueduct Trail, none of that is relevant to the text amendment or the proposed map change.
That's more specific to a project when it ultimately gets back to
What you could say
you.
is, how does this?
Maybe
how
this
does the-
relates
how
to
does the- how does the-
his talk about not wanting to segment. So he's got everything in here.
No,
Well-
no, but this, we're still on the.
I mean, but you could make an argument that the CDD district that we have now is placed because of the existing geographic features. The Croton Aqueduct is adjacent to it.
Correct.
And so, and in any proposed development under the text change, there is gonna be large areas of land conserved. So, it would be more than, I guess my point is, it'd be maybe more than just the Croton
No, it is.
Aqueduct,
That's
but
what I'm thinking, yeah.
any open space or public asset like the Croton Aqueduct,
It-
Krawbucky Park.
But the big story is Krawbucky Nature.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
it surrounds the site. So, I mean, and it's not even referenced here.
But I do think that impacts on public, things that are part of the public use, like those, like the Croton Aqueduct, should be considered insofar as they are adjacent to the zone.
That, I think it just can't be site-specific in that
Right.
regard.
That's correct.
Because
Since it-
that's a site, in other words, if they're saying something is gonna impact later upon the Croton Aqueduct, or they need a buffer or something, that's to come back before you folks, on a site plan.
Or it could talk
Or-
about buffers again.
We can always talk about, that's right.
But you can talk, we've identified these sort of public amenities that exist already. We're connecting, this, we have an aqueduct, we're sensitive, we're gonna keep a 50-foot buffer, from the aqueduct, 50-foot buffer from any development to the Krawbucky Nature Park, we're gonna stay 35 feet from the streams that run through the property. Anything that would be generalized into the ordinance.
And remember that they're proposing it to happen in any CBD or PW district,
Right.
and not all the PW districts touch Krawbucky Park.
But if they
Or
do,
preserve, sorry.
but if they do,
But they might have their own
Right,
features
issues.
that need to
Right.
be looked
So,
at in
right.
terms of
Right,
NEIS.
so yes, so in a generalized, yes, but not the specific of.
oh,
Do we need just to consider in what we, even though it's not in the same district, but do we need to consider what we say about the nature of a possible text amendment to other parts of the waterfront strip, such as hidden code, because that will also come up. Do we need, is there a need to be able to say, okay, this will influence certain decisions that might come into the future?
Yeah.
And I think that's something we right, so I thought we should probably have that in a contextual discussion as well.
That's the whole point, really, of looking at all of that
Right.
land. I mean, it just sits on the bluff all the way down.
Yeah, because if you go the property to the back, ultimately you're at
You're right
where
there.
plateau is
And-
going to be
Right.
coming in.
Mhm.
Can I ask another,
You can
one of
ask
these
as many
fundamental
questions.
questions?
It's a
Their
little-
petition that they proposed
Yeah,
makes reference, it says petitioner has made a concurrent application to the planning board for site plan review.
Yeah.
Petitioner submits that the zone text amendment and site plan review of the project should be considered jointly under secret to avoid unlawful segmentation. They
That
admit
was
that it will be a
his-
type
That was
one.
his
That was
point at the
his,
last meeting,
that was
that's what I was
his
referring.
visiting, sharing
But-
thoughts
Yeah.
last week.
two things,
Yeah.
and Lynn will, Lynn's input here is critical. There is no site plan application. There's no planning board file that is set up under this or anything. Have plans been submitted, I think, but never electronically?
They were only electronically, they were never hard copy, and they were never accompanied by a fee
But I
to be
don't know,
docketed.
the definition of segmentation,
That-
wouldn't having that in front of you actually lead you to segmentation? Because you're actually not considering everything, you're neglecting this piece while you focus on this piece.
If the idea of a text amendment or anything is to look at how it impacts upon all different zones, the cart before the horse is effectively deciding a site plan before you actually decided this. You have to get, I know what they have in there.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is also, there's financial I mean, they would love to just put this all into one large, EIS and just do it, but the simple fact of the matter is you're gonna have to go, this route. And there is no, there's no concurrent proceeding before the planning board. You haven't been asked to look at a site plan, you haven't been asked to review anything like that, because it's just not there.
See, I guess, just these are the things that are kind of like rattling around in my head right now. Typically, segmentation, the fear of segmentation is that you'll overlook larger environmental consequences
Right.
by looking narrowly at A, B, and C,
Correct.
each on their own instead of all together.
Right.
And this is an instance where the applicant is saying, we actually would prefer that the village look at these two applications concurrently. Maybe, because they want to be, sort of like John said before, maybe they want to have 1 foot on the station, 1 foot on the train. But you're telling me the interpretation is that we have to do it, the text amendment first, and then,
And I apologize, the way that their attorney presented it last week is, he said, well, there are instances where it is done essentially as one thing. And I know that, but again, here, given what they're talking about, and also because at the end of the day, it requires a text amendment or it requires a map change, which requires a board of trustee approval. Frankly, without that, where are you at the next stage? So it's important to let, the EIS, run its course. Now, in terms of this board's recommendation vis-à-vis a text amendment, this board may ultimately say, well, we want to ultimately see what the EIS is before we come back with our recommendation. We don't want to give you a recommendation on it, other than whether it's text versus map change. But we don't want to give you an ultimate, recommendation till we see what the environmental impact statement is. But it would, I know what the applicant would like to do. He would love to do this all as one, to get it tied all in as one. But they have made it very clear that they've said from the beginning, we know that this is a type 1 action, we know it's going to be a positive declaration, and we know it's going to have to be an EIS. But it has to be an EIS first. You've got to look at what they want to do in the context of that, not in the context of 198 units, but what do they propose to do
to the zoning.
to the zoning.
Right.
To the zoning, because it all flows from that. They're making this, as the chairman said before, they could easily just come in and do it based upon the density they have now. They don't need a text amendment. You know, they might need some variances, and then they come before you folks for site plan, but they don't need, but this is because they have to come this way folks. So that's, you know, I know what they have here, but this is the way it's gonna proceed.
I think you said it best, Jeff, is that, you know, if we narrowly focus it, we're gonna miss the other pieces. And-
Right, that's what
and-
I'm concerned, that we'll maybe
And we're not, right?
fall into a trap of missing the other pieces.
That's why we're talking about the space.
Right.
So dismiss all the other things, look at what the implications are for everything that's zoned WP or PW or CBD.
Yeah, I think basically what they propose here is site-specific,
Right.
and maybe just the simple recommendation is it can't just be site-specific, it's gotta be zone-specific.
Well,
Anywhere in the village that this zoning exists, you
Well-
have to do the same type of,
Well, but for purposes of their text amendment, just on its face, a text amendment, that's okay. In other words, they can present, this is my text amendment. It's the job of this board as a recommendation, and the Board of Trustees as the ultimate legislative body, to say, how does this affect the other zones that have this? Which is why, again, 250, 270, 59 list what those
This
elements
became
are.
too specific too fast.
Right.
You're right.
Well, that's-
Yeah.
They dove
I
down
think-
out of
and,
50,000 feet
well-
and it started flying around at 1,000.
But I think in fairness, you know, I'm not so sure this is the process that occurs in other communities. I think that there may be an overlay zone that applies to an underlying zone that you would apply, and there I can see running the site plan parallel to the zoning change. But because it's specific to that parcel, because the floating zone already exists. We're creating this floating zone now with a project in mind. If you recall, when we were doing the comprehensive plan and the zoning, we spent a lot of time talking about, do we want to create floating zones? So that when somebody comes in for a parcel, say that's zoned OR, they have some parameters to go by. So that if they apply those parameters that we've predetermined, they would get a rezone. And that's not what's happening here.
Right, and I mean, from my humble personal experience, the pathway to zone text amendments is generally very broadly vetted, and initiatives and compass points are extracted from the broad vetting. Maybe an action is begun to move a zone text change onto the track and get it moving. And then perhaps concepts or a range of concepts are extracted from that early movement and broad vetting.
So that, if that's the case, then the concepts have to apply to the entire
Right,
pla-
that's why they're broad.
that's right, that's what I
portfolio,
want, yeah.
not just the specific one that we're talking about.
Right, and
But
that-
they serve a real world purpose too,
No,
in and of
and-
I
that.
think that's
that's-
okay, but it's mostly, you know, imagining what could be.
That's right, and
Which is
that is
exactly
also
what
saying,
I
what
wanted
are
to do.
our, you know, what is our balloon? What does our balloon look like? How far, now we have something concrete in front of us, somebody wants to do something. Between what we would like to get in exchange, between what we would like to preserve,
What we'd like
what-
to achieve.
and what we
Not so
like
much
to,
get.
right, achieve and preserve, and, you know, give to the village as a betterment. Within that, what are the parameters, what's the scale? And I think that's where we should go, and of course, not going from a fixed number of residential units, but say it can be between this and that, all depending on how great the planners and the architects and the engineers are in terms of figuring this out. And based on the specific topography we have here, blah, 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 blah. So then we bring it, I'm also saying, Jeff, to you, as we're bringing it from, we're not segmenting out, we're not keeping blinders on in terms of what it is that is requested or from this particular applicant, but we are allowing ourselves to, I won't say dictate or mandate, but actually give a better sound reasoning for what is the right thing to do in this spot. And then that has some variables to it that they can come back with and say, okay, with that, we would like to do this, this, or that.
Then if I could like translate, what I think you're saying is the text of, you're saying the Board of Trustees should ultimately adopt should have more flexibility than what's proposed here?
No, I'm not saying more flexibility, but I'm saying we should look at it from the point of view with what we would like to gain and achieve with this. Not necessarily saying, not be so much in the abstract of saying, do we want X number of units past what is currently zoned at, but more saying, here's an opportunity. How can we take that opportunity, and with what we have in the comprehensive plan and in the waterfront district, what would fit? And that fit is not necessarily one thing. It can be a variable. And that gives us the opportunity to see things without blinders on, and it also gives the applicant an opportunity to have an option for doing something, and it becomes a constant dialogue. And I think that's a good thing.
And, you know, broadly, if assuming they come up with the right number of units and the right design, broadly, do we think this is a good thing for the village?
Is this a straw poll?
So the answer is, I'll tell you what, I think the answer is, based on what you said, yes, because something as of right could be developed today.
Yeah.
The question is, how far from that as of right do we move? And do we move at all? Right? What conditions make this proposal different than Avalon? Since we've done that and they've managed to fit into the CDD with, I think, a few variances. So why if it worked there, doesn't it work here? Why do we have to do this? And so then it gets to sort of, John, what are the overarching benefits to the community that would allow that to occur? Because that's, in my mind, the ultimate question. Because we were very clear about the buffering of where we knew what was going to happen with the nature park, et cetera, and we knew we had S-125 over here. We had, even though it's T in most of the area, it's relatively low dense T. And so how do what do you put in that? And then the burden of that, essentially, while it does have train traffic, that's twice a day, what are we going to inflict on this one way? And we've had other discussions about parcels that actually were further up on Snowden Avenue that said, you're not going to exit onto Snowden Avenue with this traffic because it's a burden. So I think there's a whole bunch of things that add this up. And then move down the street closer to the river and say, how do I even deal with that?
Right.
We're having a discussion now about whether there's even practical entrance and exit to parcels on North Water Street. We've got that compounded with all this that's in there.
The one thing, I don't want to continue to pound this, but I feel like we're going to hear it over and over and over. It's going to bubble up every time. And just so I think we're kind of all on the same page or not. The
That's
message
true.
I extracted, or I left with, from the informal presentation or dialogue, was that their view is if the zone text mechanism isn't advanced in conjunction with the site plan, they felt like any other scenario is segmentation. And I personally couldn't disagree with that more.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because
Because he's gonna
Yeah.
continue, I think.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you on that.
Exactly what I,
Yeah.
is that to do
So-
what the way we're heading is segmentation.
So if they filed a site plan application, then maybe we'd be in a different, we'd have to figure out how to coordinate those reviews, but there is no
You'd
site
still be
plan.
doing the text hearing.
Mhm.
You'd
But
still have to do it.
would they be running in parallel or would they?
It would be held on this board's agenda and it would be adjourned pending.
Continue, it would just be adjourned
Just
because
be-
they,
just- That's right, it would be
the
held on
zoning, the zoning
the.
doesn't conform, they'd either have to,
No, it would, basically, it would be held pending, because they want a particular, because their application is dependent upon a text amendment. So if they were to file a site plan application now, it would simply be held
Yeah. 'Cause it's-
pending the other thing, pending that,
Because it
so
doesn't
they
conform.
it wouldn't go anywhere.
And the reverse, and the opposite is also true, is
Right.
if it comes to the fact that it's a map change, it still wouldn't help, because we have to get through that far.
Still have to consider those other elements.
Because it's not just that site that we're talking about,
Right.
it's broader. All right, well, it's 9:00.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Great work, folks.
so we decide we are gonna meet again.
We're gonna,
We're meeting on the
so
12th.
circle the 12 unless you hear from Lynn otherwise. That work?
I'm not sure it works.
Now I can go back and study these documents,
You can.
right? I mean, I read them, and I didn't
So this
study
whole-
them this way.
This
I love it,
whole
yeah.
thing